Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 274. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to Julie South, a mom whose story beautifully weaves together joy, sorrow, and deep faith. Julie and her husband Scott are the parents of 5 daughters, including their youngest, Bellah, who came into their family through medical adoption. Bellah's life was filled with music, laughter, and the joy of being with her sisters. But it was also marked by a long and complicated medical journey that included countless hospital stays, numerous surgeries, and ultimately a 5-organ transplant. In this first half of our conversation, Julie shares about the gift Bellah was to her family, the way she radiated joy even in the midst of suffering, and what it looked like to walk day by day through so many unknowns. It's a story of resilience, advocacy, and God's presence in hospital hallways and quiet moments at home. Then, as you'll hear in next week's episode, Julie's journey didn't end with Bellah's homegoing. She also faced the lingering impact of trauma and PTSD in the years that followed. But first, let's step into Bellah's story and the legacy of love she left behind. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super grateful to be sitting here with you today.
I have been so looking forward to this conversation, just to get to know you and to hear all about Bellah and the rest of your family. But let's get started by giving you just the opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Okay. My husband, Scott, and I just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary on August 5th. And we live in Winter Garden, Florida, just a little suburb of Orlando. So basically in the Orlando area. We have 5 daughters, Julia and Hannah, who are twins, who are 25, Sarah, who's 23 and recently married, Makaylah, who's 21 and lives at home with us, and then our youngest, Bellah, who went to heaven 6 years ago at the age of 10. Scott works as a real estate attorney, and I'm a former elementary school teacher who ended up full-time mom, medical caregiver, and homeschool teacher along the way. The things we love to do around here are bike rides, Disney parks because we're local,
Sure.
and reading. So just really seeking the Lord through these days of my life.
Sure. What a wonderful household with 5 girls in it.
Yes.
I'm sure you had a lot of fun times with those girls.
Very loud and energetic, and full of joy, for sure.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So we're here today to talk primarily about your daughter, Bellah, who was medically complex. But before we do, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about your daughter, Makaylah, who also has had some significant medical challenges.
Yes. Our Makaylah Joy was born just a little bit premature, and we thought just stuff she would outgrow. But as she started to grow, it became clear that she had just a lot bigger issues. So she had huge surgeries at just 4 weeks old, placed a feeding tube because she could not safely eat by mouth. She ended up going into life-threatening seizures at 16 months old. Where we encountered our first major medical trauma that we weren't sure where her life, the direction it was going.
Yeah.
So we would go in and out of hospitalizations and just really searching of what it is we were looking at. And eventually she was diagnosed with many things, including an immune deficiency and mitochondrial disorder and a chromosome deletion. So basically around 10 years old, she started infusions for her immune system, and it turned her whole world around. And so we just stabilized. So her journey is one that's ongoing. It will be ongoing, but she is incredible now and doing more than we ever imagined that she could do. The Lord has just shown us so much through her life, and we're just grateful for where she is today.
Yeah, what a blessing. I am so glad to hear that she's stable and doing well. From what I understand, it was your experience with Makaylah that led to you to consider medical adoption. Talk about that.
Yes. So it wasn't that adoption was something that we necessarily always knew. But when we had Makaylah, and for me medically, I wasn't going to have any more kids. And we obviously had a full household. So we were just thankful for where we sat. But God just kept stirring in our hearts along the way, just through other things in our church and other people around us. And one of our twins, Julia, was actually very young, and she just kept talking like, we need to adopt. We need to have another little child. And of course, at the time, they were all like, yes. And if we're going to do that, we need to have a boy, because they were all girls. But we just kept saying, well, this is, if we do get on that path, that's the Lord's story. So Julia would even she told a mom who was pregnant in her little second grade class, like, oh, we're having a baby. We're adopting. It was like before we even. So It was just God just was stirring our hearts along the way. And as we went forward, we took in, the fact that Makaylah's journey was requiring her a lot. And so we just wanted to be very discerning, and we waited and went and eventually, we got to a place with her where it was just, God kept directing our path towards adoption. And then it was just this awareness, this really deep, profound awareness from the Lord of what we had taken in all these years in Makaylah's journey. And a lot of that in the hospital was seeing these little babies and children that were sitting alone in a crib, alone in a room, and just through interactions would find out, they don't have anybody here with them. And we knew what it was like to advocate, to live in that space. We knew what it was like for Makaylah to have us. And so our hearts kind of broke in that. And so when we started the journey, we just felt strongly led, like, we need to walk into, be open to medical. We had the advocacy, we had the experience, we had the resources, we knew the journey. So we felt like the Lord's just like here. And of course we thought at the time, so maybe something light, a minor medical issue. Right. So our girls were very on board with that as well, because they knew that world of, we traveled for medical care for Makaylah. They knew what it was to go in the hospital. And so they started just looking all over heart galleries and looking at children with special needs. And it was a beautiful picture of like God's heart in our family. So yes, that was the path that we went down. And we eventually, our life was crazy. And we just thought, can we really do this? And finally, at one point, we just said, we need to jump in. And then we'll start the classes and the foster to adopt classes. And if we're not supposed to, if our life is too much, the medical is too much, God will close a door. So we'll just keep taking the steps forward. And if he closes a door, then we will wrap around other families that are in that space. But he never closed a door. Closed a door. And so we had medical challenges all around us, and we ended up through home study. And then right after that, Bellah was the first case that we were given.
Wow. So you took her in through foster care.
We didn't actually foster. It was foster and adoptive classes, but we went in saying we were going for adoption. So there's families all in there that would be doing both. And so then as soon as our home study was complete, the very first case study that our caseworker gave us was Bellah's. Wow. So that was the first one we looked at. But yes, It was through how God led us through Makaylah's journey, as hard as it was and where we sat. That was how we walked into the medical adoption.
Sure. And what a gift Bellah was to your family. Will you take some time and just introduce us to Bellah? Help us get to know her a little bit.
I'd love to, although it's hard to figure out how to put Bellah into words.
Sure.
She was 3.5 when we first met her in the medical foster home near us. And she was a tiny, little sassy bundle of energy with a precious voice, joyous personality, never stopped dancing around, never stopped talking. She was always acting something out, singing songs, whether it was songs that she knew or she was always making up songs. A lot of times her songs she made up were about something she had to do. Sometimes they were about what she didn't want to have to do in the hospital. And she just loved to perform. So she had 4 older sisters that loved to perform and do it with her. So it was a lot of joyous sound in our house from day one. And then as we got to know Bellah and we started walking through and learning her story, God just started revealing this depth to her. So she was this, pure joy little child, but she also had this wisdom and ability to see people and connect with people in a way that just made no sense with her age. And we saw this play out in church. The first time she met her cousin that was same age, she just kind of enveloped him, wiped his tears away, said, "Let me take care of you." And they were connected from day one. She would be in the lobby and she would see older people in the church or someone walk in with oxygen and she'd say, "Oh, I have to go talk to her." And over time, as she got to see and know people that way, she would say, "I have to go pray with this person." We would talk a lot about praying, about faith in our house. We stopped to pray for much. So it was something she was picking up on. But then she just it became her space. And we noticed that other people also noticed that in her. So people that had, maybe it wasn't physical needs, but just were emotional, they would be drawn to her. So it was this beautiful picture that the Lord gave us of how he created her and how he was using her life. And in our home, we often did, my girls would sing and we did read a lot loud of books together as a family. We did a lot of devotion time. And so that was always going on. There was a time around 2015, 16 where Bellah was really talking about heaven and understanding. And because she had central line and she had tubes in her stomach and she went through a lot, as she learned about, we talk about being made new and how one day in heaven you would have no ouchies and no, because she would cry about a lot of things. She was so just amazed at that she would go around to each of her sisters and say, "Guess what? One day I'm going to have a new body. I will have no tubies, no lines." And it was just this pure excitement of childlike faith. Like, let's go. I want to go. And we would say, "Oh, well, God has a purpose for you now. We have to live our life out here." And so that was stirring in her heart. And then it was Easter and we were sitting around the table on Maundy Thursday. So the night before Good Friday. And we decided we were going to talk about Jesus going to the cross. And we played a worship song that was written by our worship pastor at the time, Sean Starbuck, and it was called "The Garden." And the whole song is just about Jesus praying in the garden and talking to his Father. And it goes into, "Let me walk with you and talk with you in the garden. And Father, if you're willing, will you take this cup from me?" And so we talked about that in depth, about how Jesus was anxious and he did not want to have to suffer. And so as we were listening to the song, we look over and we see her sitting with her hands on her little cheeks and she had tears streaming down her face. And we said, "Bellah," at the end of it, and we were, doing communion after that. And we said, "What's wrong, honey?" And she said, "I just can't believe it." Like, she was listening and we had talked about the suffering and how Jesus was doing that because of the great love, the joy before him and the love of the Father to make us back in relationship with him. And she said, but he didn't have to. And we realized it was, she went through so much pain and she understood suffering. And so it was just this sense of heaviness in her and this awe of the fact that he chose to, he didn't have to suffer. He went through all these ouchies, this terrible. And so it was the first stirring. I mean, it really moved all of our hearts because it was you just saw this picture of what we should all feel and experience, but it's not always the case. But for her, it was just this connection, she understood that. And so a couple nights later, we sat and we were reading a book by about Amy Carmichael, a missionary in India, and how she helped children, and then how she got injured and was confined to bed and had a lot of pain. And again, it was just this grief on her face. I feel so sad for her. I'm so sad for her because she's in bed and she can't do anything. But then it was this, but she's also she's still helping people know about Jesus from the place of pain and hurt. And so then after that, we look over on the couch and she's huddled under a blanket. And when she pops her head out, she's got a drawing and it's a cross. It's a red cross and it has Jesus with tears down his face. And she had written, "I love God and Jesus." And so at that moment, we would talked to her about it. And all of her sisters sat there with her, and she gave her life to Jesus, recognizing him as her Lord and Savior. And it changed the course of what was ahead. Because from there on was this deep relationship. It was this all that God created her already, but it was a knowing, and it became that crying out to him, wrestling with him, even at her young age. And eventually would be conversations, towards the end of her life of mommy, I don't want to have to do this. And, I know God's with me. I know he's right here, but I just really wish I could see him. I just want to see him. If just for a minute I could see him. And we would have the conversation about how, we walk by faith, not by sight. And we all want to see him face to face. And one day we will. But right now we have to trust and believe he's holding us, so it would continue. There was 2 months before Bellah went to heaven, her little transplant friend, Harper, went to heaven. And after that, we asked Bellah, why don't you draw a picture of what you feel and what you want her mommy? It was just that she was so sad for the family. And she drew a picture that had a yellow sky with angels. And then it said joy, 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 all across the top. And then there was a little picture on the side with flowers of a little girl. And it was Harper. And there was a mountain under the joy. And in the middle, like underneath the mountain, was this picture of a little girl with tears that said, I'm sad. And the picture became this, she knew Harper had no more pain, was in pure joy and healed. But for her, she was so sad. And until the day that she was going to be there, she'd be sad. And it's a picture that we carried and still carry, and a whole community carried, of what it looks like to know joy ahead because of Jesus, and to sit in the sorrow now, and how the two come together. So really that profound moment of Bellah's empathy for Jesus and the grasping of the garden changed the course of her life. And then in turn, the story for so many others, and how they would come to know just peace and the joy of the Lord, and trusting and surrender through her story.
I've seen that picture on your blog, and I had read a little bit of the summary behind it, but to hear the story from you about the meaning of that picture just makes it come alive. And it just amazes me how God used this little girl to touch so many people, and through her suffering, it's just a beautiful picture of his redemption and beauty from ashes. And thank you for sharing that.
Yes. And on that, with one of her favorite things she always said was, it's the best day ever. And it kind of, we feel like that tied into when just her grasping of the joy ahead. But she could be recovering from surgery, and an hour later, she could get a book from somebody, and she would say, wow, this went from the worst day ever to the best day ever. And so everything was, it's the best day ever. For her. So it kind of, that stuck too in the community of like, that's what we have. That's what we have ahead. That's what we have in the now. And it's the best day ever. And that also is what we've continued for her legacy. We can't help her heart for others, for making best days ever, for bringing joy, for helping other kids. And so every year, that's even in the now, this year it's just providing moments of connection, for families walking these very difficult stories, and to be able to have best days ever in the midst of the worst days ever.
Yeah, I love that idea of giving best days ever to other families. Wow. And now Bellah is just experiencing a series of best days ever.
Yep. We cannot even imagine. But
That's
yes,
right. One after
joy.
Another.
Yep.
Thank you. Now, you traveled an incredibly difficult road with Bellah medically. And I know there's no way that you could share it all with us in the time that we have, but I'd love for you to share whatever you feel comfortable talking about.
Yes. So Bellah she was born prematurely, but she was actually born losing most of her intestines at birth. So she was considered to have short gut syndrome. Her outlook for survival at birth was not great. It was, we would learn through paper and reading back of her history, like so many times where the projected length of her life was not long. So she was sustained fully by IV nutrition. She had a central line that went straight to her heart. She had what's called TPN, which was just nutrition through the IV. She also had a feeding tube, so she would get milk pumped in, but because she had very little intestines, it would all come right back out. So it was a delicate balance to keep her hydrated and to keep her electrolyte stable. So anything could go wrong at any time. When we first took her in, the girls had to learn that. And so everywhere we went she had the risk of vomiting. And so it was in the car, in the house, wherever, they learned that part of her story. And so you could hear them yelling, somebody grab a bucket, come hold the bucket in the car. It was just a beautiful picture of care and learning her. But so because of the central line, she had to be monitored constantly with that. She had night nursing in the foster home that we took in for a little bit. And if she developed a fever, it was an automatic hospitalization because a line infection, straight to the heart and the blood, it could take her life quickly. So her journey became with us one of saying, we're going to pull her in and love her and let her know a family. And we are going to research and find the best care. And that love and all of that focus, hopefully we can get her intestines just healed in ways and growing and learning to eat by mouth where she can be sustained, be on less IV nutrition, and have that removed. And that was our hope for her. But as we journeyed along, did feeding clinics and tried all sorts of things, we learned that what intestine she did have did not absorb well. We still attempted surgeries, and along the way, basically, we just ended up in crisis after crisis of surgeries not being effective, and her eventually going into liver damage, liver failure, and ultimately needing to be listed for a 5-organ transplant. And so we walked down the path of that after a 65-day stay in the hospital, being listed for 11 months, going through transplant, and then all the complications that came with that. And eventually one of those complications would be what took her life from us. So
I've never heard of a 5-organ transplant. What were the organs that needed to be transplanted?
It was her stomach, small and large intestine, pancreas, and liver. So the whole basically gut is, we knew, at the time that she had it, we had her for, 4.5 years. And we knew back in the beginning, it was not a transplant you wanted to go to. It was, where there's transplants that are, more or less like they've been done so long and not perfected, but they're known and successful. This one is one very much that was still considered experimental. It was a lot too, because just to get all those parts working, and we knew statistically, we knew all the risk, but yet we also knew that there was no option to do nothing. So it was a very difficult part of the journey to have landed in a place where all of our prayers, all of our efforts, everything we thought we could bring, that the Lord allowed it to go in a direction that was our only choice. And that was the direction we had to go.
Yeah, I know what it is to send a child in for a surgery. Hannah just had one surgery, the brain surgery, with that fear of not knowing, how they're going to come out from the surgery. You talk a little bit about what that was like, that day of surgery?
Yeah. So, the very first, Bellah had multiple surgeries along the way. I think the very first one with us, newly having her, brought panic. And even though we had dealt with surgeries with Makaylah, it was this place of, I don't know her body, herself well enough. And I know we're not there yet, like her security from an adoption standpoint, this idea of learning mommy and daddy and safety. And the first surgery was very much walking in the room. I got to be in there with her. And it was the first time it really hit me how she survived in a place without people securely around her. And her eyes told this story of like wanting to do what everybody expected. So I looked at her and saw her lip quivering, and it was that whisper of like, hey, this is so scary and I'm scared too, and it's okay. And watching her fall apart. So there was this place in Bellah's journey that was just this profoundly beautiful place of having to connect at the heart level and reassure her and get her to know security and love and that we're not leaving her side. But then also this piece as a mom and a dad that's just you're releasing to the unknown, and you have to trust the hands that are going to be there. And so it is as you know, a very fragile space, and a space that you have to just sit and open your hands and trust that the Lord is holding her as he's holding us. And
exactly.
Trust and surrender.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In your blog, you write about the experience of living in the walls of a hospital. And I'm sure you felt very alone during a lot of that time, that you were living basically in the hospital, but you weren't. Talk about that.
Yes. So we had experienced hospitalizations, and we knew the routine of it. We even knew so many of the doctors and care at our hospital, because it was unusual in adoption, especially medically complex adoption, that you would end up in the same place. So we had that security, a familiarity with the hospital. But, in those early years, we found ourselves in and out for different reasons. So there was somewhat familiarity. But in this space with Bellah, as we were working on attachments, and there were hard emotions in there and hard things that I was learning to take on all of her medical care, and that she was learning and trusting me. There was still that unknown of herself and her story and her past. And there were a lot of nurses that knew her. And so I was taking in a lot of things. But the loneliness came as I'd say the medical issues intensified, the hospitalizations intensified, the journey of connecting and learning her and learning the heart intensified. And so there were times I would walk in the darkness, and you just kind of take it all in. You take in this place of dark quiet, and you take in this place of cries and screaming, and you take in this place of where you connect with eyes walking down the hallway, and you see grief and sadness, and you see hopefulness, and you see compassion. And so it was this place of, I don't know, the Lord just put on my heart, like, what does it look like through the halls of a hospital? Where do you see me? And so he led me to see just all these different layers. And it's like, we have our fears and our worries and our overwhelmed sense of needing things to go a certain direction. And it was almost like God was saying, okay, look above that and let me give you a different perspective and a different lens. And in that place, he showed me, like, I'd walk by a room and it would be a child in a bed, but I would see Bellah. And I would see her as a baby, and my heart would grieve, and I would cry, and I would think, oh, why didn't she have anyone around her? And then it was like quickly he would shift my perspective to those nurses that would tell me that they had her. And a moment where one would say, oh, she would stick her little hand out and say, rockabye, rockabye. And that nurse would be leaving a shift, exhausted and having taken in so much. And she would put her stuff down and go sit, gown up, because she'd be on contact isolation, and hold her and rock her. And it was like God was like, look at this. Like, I provided for her, and I held her. And look what I was doing in the lives of everyone who came in contact with her. And then it was just this, and now look at where you are. Like, she doesn't have a moment where someone's not rocking her, or someone leaves her side, or a night alone. So it was really a beautiful picture they gave me that was incredibly hard. I wrote one of the things that stands with me that at the end was, through the halls of the hospital, I'm reminded I'm not alone. I find hope there, because even in the darkest of spaces, he is there. In this space, I will wrestle. I will be confronted with more pain, more darkness, and more grief. My heart cries out, lamenting the place of suffering that seems endless. But through that raw honesty of pain and suffering, there is not a loss of truth. Suffering is drawing me near, producing endurance, producing hope. My heart still shatters, but my heart also cries out, declaring the truth of who God is, the truth of his goodness, and the truth of his love. He has never left my side, not in the darkest of nights when painful screams reverberate off the walls, not in the PICU watching a machine breathe after a fourth surgery, not in realities of being separated as a family or in the crushed hearts of our other girls, not in the loneliness that comes from walking this broken path for so long, not in the deepest, darkest pit. The truth of his redemption and the truth of the hope of eternity is absolute. He is my refuge. I will run with all that I am to find rest in the shelter of the Most High. And many days I crumble with thoughts of unknown and pain ahead. They bring me to my knees in panic, but I will fight with all I have to cling to the cross, because he has shown me over and over he will not let me fall. I'm trusting in his unfailing love. And it was just this, I could not have produced the words. It was words that it was a reality that he allowed me to see. And that was all before what we would walk into coming ahead. So it was just, that place where you look back and see the faithfulness of God along the way. He alone would know the impossible that was ahead and the wrestle to remember that. But yes, in the halls of the hospital is a devastating reflection of the fall in this world and the brokenness of this world, but is a profound place to see the mercy and love and presence of God.
Wow, that's a beautiful statement you just made. I love that. Those two things meeting there in the halls of the hospital. Yeah, beautiful picture. Thank you. Thank you for that. So in addition to your roles as wife and mom to 5 girls, including still mothering Makaylah with her medical issues during that period, you also took on the role of advocate. How did that add to the stress of the entire situation?
Yes, well, a lot. Being an advocate was something I learned early on. Obviously, in Makaylah's story, I had no clue going into that. And I would learn very quickly that you needed to look out to the community of other parents that had walked past, because, you had wonderful doctors, but you didn't get a full picture. And so along Makaylah's story, there was a lot of advocacy in that had to come. And her story led us to a place where ultimately I would sit on a family advisory council at our hospital, which was a gift that they started that, to have parents come in and share what would be helpful for other parents. And it was in that time that we walked into Bellah's story. And so we became an ambassador family for Children's Miracle Network, where we would go in the community and speak to people that were helping the hospital. We spoke at universities and shared our story and encouraging people to see these kids fighting these really hard battles, and so they fundraised and they helped the hospital, but they also celebrated the story. So for our girls, it was a place of beauty. They were surrounded and poured into and recognized, and they learned to share their stories, and they learned that others were fighting for them. And that was also a gift to me as a mom. The other part of advocacy was the actual being day to day and responsible for your child. And so obviously with Makaylah, we had that with her from day one. With Bellah, I was learning as I went, and I learned pretty quickly. And then it was the place of having to fight for your voice with your child. And you realize that, yes, I didn't have Bellah from day one, but I learned her, I knew her, and she was my child. And her story was so complex. So it required navigating so many specialists, so many people that felt like their area was the first. And so it just, as time went on, especially towards transplant, I had to take on a role of holding a lot of pieces to both protect her, to protect our family. And unfortunately, you learn the hard way that you can advocate, but your voice is drowned out, and then something happens that they suffer through as a result, and you're still fighting. And a lot of times it's an uphill battle. And in Bellah's case with 5-organ transplant, and honestly, the experts in that not really knowing, we were fighting, and Scott was calling centers all over the world, because even our team knew. They didn't know. Nobody knew with the diagnosis that Bellah was given post-transplant. And so we were not only researching and advocating, but for me, I was bedside. I was a primary medical caregiver. I learned all of Bellah's care early on. I did her central line care. I did her ostomy care, because that's how she came to know me as mommy, that she knew me as different than a nurse. So advocacy took on a huge role in that way. So I had to watch every move. And then ultimately with dynamics between teams and where I was at in Bellah's story, I had to hold myself together. I had to hold it together to fight for her, to not show emotion, to not fall apart, to not let my guard down ever. So it was like my back was protecting her. I was holding her, watching everything, but I was also protecting myself and also my family. Ultimately, it was how everyone was being impacted. So unfortunately, it's not something you would like to feel like I am in a place where I can just sit and hold my child, be with her, treasure every moment, love in that, And other people would come in and do that. But when you're having to protect and advocate and watch, it takes you from that place in many ways. And you stay in a place that is really fight or flight continuously.
That's what I was just thinking as you were describing that. That was the term that was coming to mind, is just fight or flight continuously and never having a break from that, because you're at the hospital, I assume, 24 hours a day. You're not sleeping. And you do have to advocate for your child because you know that child better than anybody else. And it's just the way it works when you're in the hospital like that, that you have to be that advocate. And I know that's exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yeah. And I'm sure, anybody that's listening that has walked their child through an illness like that knows exactly what you're talking about. And hopefully this helps them feel a little bit less alone.
Yes.
A little bit seen, that somebody does understand that. So home was a very significant concept for Bellah, partly due to the circumstances of her adoption. We understand that. And also because she was hospitalized so much. And as Bellah's earthly life was coming to its end, home became an even more weighty word for her. Talk about that.
Yes. Like you said, it was obviously the whole journey of connecting and knowing family and home as a safe place was
sure.
key for her. And so as she went through hospitalizations, it became so clear how she came to see that. And so she would, leading up to transplant even, she would be in the hospital and just sing make-up songs. I just want to be home. I want to be home. And she would sing about her sisters. She would sing about mommy and daddy. Home is my favorite place. And so it was a beautiful picture for us and even the community that surrounded us and followed her story because they knew the depths of that. And then leading up to transplant, it was, I don't want to leave my home, but I know my mommy and daddy will be there and my sissies. And so when we went to transplant, we were 4 hours away from home. And so it was not only just the hospitalization, but it was distance. It was so hard on the entire family because you're so split apart. And she knew that, and she longed for home. So as we would give updates along the way, and she was in the hospital almost 5 months after transplant, we would update, and we would end our updates with, the prayer needs. And then we'd say, as Bellah wants, her biggest desire is pray her home, pray her home, pray her home. And so when that day came that she actually got to come home, which we weren't sure would happen, it was like an answered prayer. Everyone prayed her home, and community lined the streets with signs and balloons and cheering her. It was just this kind of sweet, beautiful miracle. And it was this little glimpse of what you imagine it would like when going home to heaven, of just that rejoicing. And so that was a gift. And then, her path, she didn't have long of carefreeness before it became intense again. So as we neared the end of the time, she was essentially in the hospital from January of 2019 with little bits out until she went home in August to heaven. Towards the end was a desperate longing to stay home. And as like in that place of when it becomes terminal and you realize there's no more chances of healing on this earth, that is the longing. And it's profound for Bellah, especially given her story and how long and how much she longed for it. But because she went into bone marrow failure, there was a safety issue and a trauma factor of having her at home. And so we talked with her, and it was just that desperation of her heart. I want to stay home. I want to stay home. But we ended up in the hospital, facing the last 6 days of her life of her life. And she would say, but mommy, remember, everybody said I could be home. I want to be home. I want to be home. And it was a beautiful, sacred 6 days that had so much profound pain and desperation, and yet beauty and holiness. And there was a moment in the middle of the night in those last few days where she said, mommy, remember we get to go home. Like, can you ask them? Let's go home. Let's go home. And I remember just my heart squeezing, like, how do I answer this? And I said, Bellah, everybody's here. Like, mommy, daddy, your sisters, grandparents, your whole family's here. And we're all together. So it's like we're home. We're home.
Yeah.
And she said, okay, okay, okay. And I said, but we'll keep asking, we'll keep trying. And she wouldn't know any different. But in those last days, it would be that in sharing the heart with the community that was walking alongside, it became, hey, you all have prayed her home all these years. Mm-hmm. You prayed her home, prayed her through miracles. You prayed her into her arms. So, but right now, our prayer is that you would pray her home to her eternal home, to the arms of Jesus. Just would you pray with us for that? And it was a very difficult thing. And yet it was just this kind of sacred, beautiful thing too. So that's what home became.
Yes, that's the hardest prayer to pray.
Yes.
We've prayed that ourselves. And like you said, that is a hard and holy journey when you walk your child into the arms of Jesus. So hard. But like you said, holy and moments of beauty in the midst of such deep pain.
I will say there with Bellah, she had an awareness because of the nature of her journey. She understood at some point and made that decision with us. And so for us, there were moments where our prayers in that place were just, can we just have the supernatural presence of peace? And that's true. Like that was there, but there were also moments of real, raw, desperate cries. And Bellah in her age and in the little bit of just not clarity, there were times that she would cry that out. Like, okay, Jesus, just more time, just more time, maybe 10 years, maybe 3 years, maybe 10 months. I mean, she would use these words and we would sit around her just with our hands open, kind of in a panic, like, whoa, Lord, that this is painful. But yet then she would stop and she would say, okay, she would take a deep breath and she would say, let's play. And she would play as far as she was able, and she made necklaces with her sisters. And there were these moments where you just watch this, it's like the wrestle of our heart, right? On this planet. Yes. Like, I don't want this pain, and this is not the story we want, and it's not what she wanted. But yet she knew who was holding her. And it took a while. Yes. But eventually God let us see that. Like, he was present in that space. And he knew her heart and was wrestling and reassuring her. And then we got to feel that through her in the treasured moments that we were given. So,
yeah, it's a gift. Johnny Erickson uses the term, a bruising of a blessing. It's a bruising of a blessing to walk your child home like that. You have been very honest about your struggles with PTSD since Bellah's homegoing, and I would love for you to talk about what you've experienced and maybe continue to experience and where God has you now. I feel like there are some listeners today that would really benefit from hearing that part of your story.
Yes. Well, having listened to this much of the story and just the way that God provided for me through all of it, to hold on to more than is humanly possible, medical details, advocacy, fighting, heart level issues, doing all of it's essentially an ICU nurse and full-time mommy in 5 directions and just very difficult hospital realities. You would think I walked that journey seeing what was ahead, and somewhat I knew, but I think as most people who have been on your podcast or who listen, even in that space of knowing, like, there is not a knowing. There is you think there's a knowing, whatever that anticipatory grief or realization, but then it's gone and it's dark.
Right.
And so for me, so much of my story was the medical trauma, crises, heart issues, family dynamics, advocacy. And I really lived in fight or flight, holding details, not just of Bellah's, but we walked in stories around us of many children. And that went to heaven before Bellah and after. So it was a constant journey.
Yeah. And that impacts you too.
Yes, absolutely.
When you see that and you walk through that with other families.
Right. Because it's in real time and she's experiencing in real time. And so the layers upon layers of trauma and grief are there. But then suddenly that Bellah, who's our fight and our everything we're in it and everything that our family is surrounded fighting for is not there. And your brain cannot comprehend it, no matter what you think you know. And so for me, what I think happened was being in fight or flight like that constantly for several years. It was definitely several years. And after much work, it was helped, some experts helping me to understand it. In the aftermath, my brain was injured. It was injured in this space. It's like a real thing. Like it was something I fought against because my faith was strong. I thought I understood. And suddenly I couldn't see anything. I was having everything around me was triggering a fight or flight response as if I'm still in the danger, but I wasn't. And it was as if Bellah she still needed me. And there's so many layers in that I could talk forever about, and in particular to Bellah's journey and the cries of her heart intertwined with mine. But ultimately, we also had COVID hit within the first 6 months of Bellah's going to heaven. So we lived with masks and caution, and suddenly the world around us was wearing masks and everybody was isolated and frozen. And I think it created a new, fresh trauma in reliving or thinking something was happening. And also it isolated community. And so any part of that, you hear parents talk about like going to church is hard or going out to community is hard. There was none of that. And for me, I had been isolated from community because I was full medical immersion, Bellah and safety. So I had been out of community for a long time. We also had to drop Julie and Sarah off at college the day after Bellah's celebration of life.
Oh.
And that drive, we all went together. We had done the year before, dropping Julie off. And it was so intense because Bellah had survived transplant and got to do it, but she was with us. So then suddenly we're in a Panera Bread and I think that I need to be holding her in the bathroom. So little bits started hitting me then. Then COVID came. And then I lived my life on the front porch because I was scared to see anything because everything brought a flashback. It would be in that place that people around me would basically push me to realize that there was no way out of this on my own. That my faith, though I would sit there and scream and cry out to God, God, you know my faith. I know these things. I know truth. I know why. So why is this happening? Like you could stop it. And then it became, I should be able to figure it out. I know better. I should be able to figure it out. And also on a side note, I did all the training of trauma for children coming from hard places. So I could sit there and articulate to somebody what's happening in my brain. And yet I could not do anything. And it became so dark that I would end up in a counselor's office twice a week doing therapies that I would have to walk into the memories, face the trauma in order to get that trauma out, to be able to walk towards grief. It was intense for me for 2 years. The first year of all triggers and flashback. I did not drive a car for a year and a half because when I drove, Bellah was behind me and my brain thought I was going somewhere and needed to protect her. And then it became, how do I go out without her? Everything in me screamed it wasn't right. And so the hardest part of the trauma piece, the PTSD, I think, for me as a mom or a dad, or whoever that was facing that not only had I lived this with my child, not only had God allowed the story to be that she left our arms for heaven, but now in that immense pain and the horror that is, I'm reliving it and I can't, why does this have to be? It just became, and not only that, but then there's no way around that. It's not, I can't run from it. It's happening to me all the time. So the only way through was to go into it. And so I wrestled hard, like, God, how can it be? I lived all of this, that I have to go face these things as they come. And it was hard and I had no choice. It was that God showed me that was my journey and I didn't have to understand. But what I could know was that he was going to continue to sustain me through all of it. And it was a wrestle and it was hard. And the people around me could attest to that. But it was a declaring and a knowing that not one moment of that experience or pain would be for nothing. And so for whatever it is and however long it took, God was going to do something with it. It just took me crying out, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. You alone can sustain me. In the dark at night, when it was overwhelming, is, Your mercies are new every morning. I will see that sunrise. You will hold me there. You are my hiding place. You are all of it. And I still reel in the after effects of that.
Sure.
In where it's left me much harder to integrate back into life because of how long isolated. And again, COVID played a role in all of that, in that battle
Sure,
through.
of course.
But it also for someone, and maybe some of your listeners can relate to this, but after going through an intense amount of PTSD and your brain heals to that point that you kind of can grasp the why and, okay, you've had to go through this. Just like if somebody lost an arm or a leg, they were not suddenly going to be like, hey, you should get up and walk and climb a mountain. You have to go through the hard work. Right. But then there's a place where mentally you just grieve that you just had that you could not just grieve your child, that you could not be there in the way you wanted to be there in other ways. So it's its own grief. It's its own wrestle and its own reconciling with the Lord that even happened in the first place. So I have a deep heart of compassion for anyone walking in this story, because there's some degree of that everybody goes through in this loss. No matter what your story is, it's shocking to your brain. You have to walk through that. But then the darkness of it all, the intensity of it all, the longing in it all, the added trauma that it brings, it's so real. And it's not your fault. It is not your fault. And it took me forever to accept that, just because of how God wired me and what he allowed me to hold together. And so I had to stop my brain and I had to surrender and say, okay, it's not my fault. God, I can't work my way out of this. So eventually what he showed me was, in my wrestle to try to control it, which I kept doing, and find my way out, was that it was nothing about me. It was all just what he was doing. And that space, that journey for me was a long one of rest and healing. And I'm still in. And there was this one moment where it was like, how could you have gone through such a long journey of moments of loving and medical trauma and all of it, the intensity that it was, and think that would somehow just disappear. Right. So the journey of love and fight was that long. So of course, why would I think that suddenly there would not be the same? And honestly, this journey of being a parent, having lost a child this side of heaven, you realize it will not end. There is no end. But there is a knowing of how profoundly you're held and carried. And so those two worlds start to come and collide together, that place of joy and sorrow, and that place of not one moment is lost. So God, if my eyes are fixed on you, there is a reason, there is a purpose, and you're enough. So I will keep clinging to you and trusting, even though for me, it's felt like forever. There were many days that it just felt like, I don't know. It's so long. And I think I've heard other parents, especially in the early parts, say that, like, I need it to stop. Like how? And it's like, I know. What else do you say? I know. Right. And it will continue until eternity, but this part of it won't.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. The weight will not always be as heavy as it is now. As we close out this first half of my conversation with Julie South, I hope you've been encouraged by the glimpses into Bellah's life and the faith that carried Julie through so many incredible days. In next week's episode, we'll pick up where we left off and talk more about Julie's own journey with PTSD after Bellah's homegoing, what surrender has looked like for her, and how she's finding ways to offer hope to other grieving parents today. You won't want to miss the rest of this powerful story. So be sure to join us again next week.